Howdy folks, this is episode 20 of the SRA podcast, and as always, this is your host, Alex Humva, and this is a bit of a special episode, guys. I'm sure you could tell by the, that there title, that this one was going to be a little bit different. So this is a bit of a different episode. I am just by myself this time, no guests, no Faye, because it's a special episode. We'll go ahead and say that. So, this is episode 20. We've made it 20 regular episodes plus the Patreon episode. I'm sorry there hasn't been more Patreon episodes. I am still working to make sure that is something that happens over the holidays. Like I said before, I have some time over the holidays to get this taken care of. So I'll be making some more episodes. Don't worry. I'll definitely be working to make sure my patrons get the special content that I've said I would make. Want to make sure that is still fulfilled. And yeah, I've had a good run. I think 20 episodes isn't a bad run for the podcast at all. And before people start having a heart attack, the SRA podcast, it's not ending. It's just going under a bit of a change in things. Just due to, the amount of time that, I spend on the podcast and, kind of just a reconfiguration of things going on in the organization. The podcast, I will not be doing this podcast for the SRA anymore. So, just to, give a history of what's going on for folks that, maybe never knew or, just joined recently or, just started listening to the podcast. You might not even be an SRA member. You might just listen because you like the podcast. And if so, I really appreciate it. I'm glad that people have been able to hear my thoughts on these subjects. So, I started this, I think, back in May. I joined the SRA, April, just shortly after you were able to join as a member. That's when the membership process started, and I joined pretty soon after. And yeah, it was something I was thinking about. I've always kind of wanted to do podcasting. I feel like, I don't always speak the best. Words sometimes escape me, but I do feel like I can talk my way through most things, even if I'm not always the most elegant about it. And yeah, I started it kind of just out of, just out of thing that I wanted to do, basically. I was part of the organization as a member, and, I was wanting to get involved, so I was like, hey, I want to do a podcast. Would that be okay? And the leadership back then said, yeah, that would be totally cool. So I made those first few episodes. You can go back in the history and watch those first few episodes, actually, and very different, to say the least. Very different. I basically read off headlines off of Reddit and gave a few quick comments. That was very short. I think the first episode was 10 or 15 minutes, something like that. Not very long at all. Not very long format, not very discussion heavy, nothing like that. So, I took a hiatus back then after 3 episodes, and I kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I kind of changed things up a little. I stopped just reading off headlines off the subreddit. I started going out and finding news to talk about. I started bringing guests onto the show from the organizations. We've had Brad on, we've had Faye, we've had J.O. I was meaning to get some more folks on, and it just ended up never working out, or, people had their own things to do. Some episodes, I recorded and ended up just being not good episode for one reason or the other, and so they never came out. So yeah, it was something that I continued to work on, and I've been trying to do it on a weekly basis. As listeners know, that did not quite work out these last few weeks, that I've been delayed on things. I've been doing more with the organization. Like some of you know, I was elected president of the SRA in October when we reincorporated here in Kansas. So I am a president of the SRA now. I'm on the central committee, And that started, to make some changes, because this has always been an independent project on my part. It has the SRA name on it, but it was never an official publication of the SRA. It was always done, first by an informal, handshake sort of deal that, you get to use the name and you can go out and do your podcast. When I started my Patreon and I started, getting some pledges for that, I entered into a licensing agreement. So I retained my creative independence, as it were, but, I paid the organization a fee for using the name. And this is, that it wasn't anything outrageous. The details of the contract aren't necessary to be brought up here, but, it was a reasonable fee. It kept the tax man off of our backs and everything, and was compliant with all of that, and that worked pretty good. But the fact of the matter is, I can speak as Alex Tackett. And by the way, guys, Humva is a stage name, but I'm sure most folks have figured that one out by now. Though, as much as I use either one, it's almost like either are acceptable names at this point. But I can speak as Alex the President, or I can speak as Alex the Podcaster, or Alex the Person, or Alex the Syndicalist, or whoever. I have a lot of different hats that I can wear and I can speak under, but it's difficult to be president of the SRA and then go on a podcast that's called the SRA Podcast and not, have that conflict there. It doesn't matter if there's something on paper saying, oh, well, this is completely out of our control and it's completely under your control. It doesn't matter what a piece of paper says. It's how it's perceived. And I can come on every episode and remind folks that, hey, this is just me talking with Faye or talking with whoever, and it's just my opinions, and this isn't the organization. But nonetheless, there's the name, there's the logo, there's all of that stuff tied to it, and it is really a conflict. And people, who never knew anything about the organization, who their first exposure to the SRA is the podcast. I'm glad that I've been able to provide that first exposure, but nonetheless, it's the sort of thing that it's difficult to separate the two, because for somebody who doesn't know the details, they just come on, they see the SRA podcast, they think this is what the SRA is all about. And I'm glad that I've provided a positive influence for that. I don't think I ever said anything on the show, or anyone else has ever said anything on the show that would reflect badly on the SRA. But nonetheless, these are my opinions, and it's difficult to separate those two from the organization. And even going into the future, it's still difficult to keep things away, because, I'm still the president of the SRA. If I'm ever talking about the SRA, I am inherently influenced and biased by my participation in the organization. I try to keep myself rational, and I try to keep myself independent, but especially when talking about matters of the SRA, it's just impossible because of my involvement in the organization as a member on the committee, and as president, as an officer of the organization. So I don't want to stop podcasting, and that's the big thing, that I really like doing this. I like, I'm actually standing now. I don't sit down to podcast anymore. You guys might notice a little bit better sound quality, hopefully. Depending on how this comes out. I was testing it earlier. I got a nicer mic stand, so it elevates it so I can talk and stand. I still need to get myself a pop filter. It's really a basic thing that I should really have, so I can get a little bit closer to the mic without, all that enunciation going and overwhelming people. I'm watching the waveform forms right now, and it's still, peaking out because I have to have my gain set up so high. So I'm sorry for that, But I do like it. I do genuinely enjoy this. So I definitely want to keep on doing this, but I also want to do something that's best for the organization, because I do wholeheartedly feel that, as biased as I may be, I do feel like the SRA is doing good stuff. I do feel like what we've got on the roadmap for 2019 is going to be excellent. I am glad that I am a member, and I am honored that I can be in a position of leadership in the SRA and help the organization get to where it needs to go and do what it needs to do in the American political scene and American society in general, and the world, hopefully one day. Hopefully the SRA is an international organization that transcends these legal boundaries put upon us. And yes, I really hope that it goes well, and I think that the SRA podcast is an important platform that the organization can and should use to, disseminate information, to disseminate news, to provide updates on the organization. I think podcasting is a very viable format for the organization, and certainly many other organizations and groups have their own podcasts to be able to go and do exactly that, to put their message out on this audio format. Unfortunately, because this is a independent endeavor, because I have creative control, that means that can never be quite that. And it exists in this two worlds at the same time. And I think it's best at this point that, it kind of separates formally. So what's going to happen, kind of a roadmap of what's happening, is that, there's this episode 20. And, I've provided my explanation. Over the next week, I'm going to try to sit down with Faye and hopefully some others and record some special episodes to put out on the Patreon. And then probably about the turn of the year, I'm going to, provide the organization the RSS feed that this podcast is on. I'm going to turn over the hosting site to the organization for their control and management. And going forward from that is kind of, we're still working out the details exactly of what that will look like. I'm not going to be hosting the podcast anymore, so maybe Faye will take over that from the organization side. Maybe somebody else will. I'm not sure exactly about that. And of course, the holidays means that folks are busy with other things, so it's been something that we've got to think about and talk about a little bit going forward. But I'm confident the folks within the organization and our talented members and volunteers will be able to continue the podcast just as good, if not even better. Hopefully even better, as this has been really, I have no professional experience in sound engineering or anything. This is just a guy with a microphone who's been speaking his thoughts with another member of the organization or members of the organization for the last several months. So I really do hope that the talent we can draw from the organization makes this into an even better, even more professional production. As far as my direct projects, the RSS feed and everything is going to turn over to the organization. So if you're subscribed to the podcast, you should receive any new episodes in just the same format. It will pop up on your podcast player of choice, and the organization will continue to promote the podcast. As far as me, I have got a couple different projects on the to-do list. I hope that by the end of January, I'll have a new, fully independent, as it were, production going. Whether or not the SRA will promote that, whether or not other organizations or individuals will promote that, it's just whatever I can talk to folks about and we can see about doing any sort of collaboration with. That's my hope. As far as my patrons on Patreon, that is going to be rebranded. So the URL is going to change on that. The name's going to change. I don't know if I'm going to put it towards a specific podcast project or if I'm going to put it under my personal umbrella group. Humva Development is my personal, creative grouping, I guess, of different projects I work on and off on. And that whether or not it'll just, be a generic Patreon to support those efforts, or if it'll be for a specific podcast, I've kind of got to think about for the next week or so and see where I want to put that. And definitely, I appreciate any feedback folks have. You can email me at contact@humvadevelopment.com, or you can send me a private message on any platform that I'm on. So, I'm on Discord, I'm on the Slack, I'm in a different couple of places. I even got some old school stuff like Skype and AIM. But yeah, I think this is going to be a good change. I've definitely enjoyed hosting the SRA podcast for the time that I've been its host. And I think that the organization can really do a good job taking this forward while I, spend some time on more personal projects, a little bit more removed from the organization and, more directly under my name instead of the organization's name and logo and everything. So, again, any feedback, I welcome any feedback. It's really just how things are going to be for now, and I'm definitely looking forward to what I can do in the future. And I think I'm not going to make any promises for Faye, but I've definitely talked to Faye a bit in private, and it does sound like she's definitely willing to come help me with any future projects as well. So, if you guys are listening for Faye, I'm sure she'll still be around on the SRA podcast, but I'm also probably going to be talking with her on future projects, depending on what those projects are and what her availability is. Again, I can't make promises for her, but she's definitely expressed some interest in doing things in the future on other side projects as well. So I think I'll conclude just about here. I've definitely rambled on by myself to just enough at this point. There's a lot of news out there as well, folks. At the time I'm recording this, the government has shut down, apparently. Not that I really noticed. It doesn't seem like anarchy has started outside, and that's kind of what I assume what happens in a government shutdown, but unfortunately it's much more boring than the name might suggest. So definitely check out the news, folks. There's always something out there. There's always something to be seen. There's always something to be heard. There's always someone saying something. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But I think keeping yourself informed as much as you can, as much as, it's healthy for you to do, I think that's very important for folks to be able to be knowledgeable about what's going on in the world. And that's why I've been spending some time every week, every couple weeks to make an episode where I talk about the news a little bit with Faye or anyone else. It's an important thing, and I definitely recommend to everyone that you find as many sources as possible. Even if you don't agree with the source, sometimes it's better to see what the other side is saying as well, and so you're even more informed. Don't always take what you read and hear and see at face value, because sometimes there's folks with an agenda that's hiding it, but more knowledge never hurts, especially when you can be informed and you can make informed decisions about what you've seen and heard. So, with that, I will leave you all with a classic to seize the means of production.